Okay, how much do I need to explain for this? All right, this will be a long one.
We are the Space Marines.
Hi, I'm Arbitor Ian. I am a massive Warhammer fan and I make videos about the background of Warhammer on YouTube. So I am here to answer all of your Warhammer questions from the simplest to the most nerdy. Let's dive in.
What is your pledge?
My pledge is eternal service.
Okay, let's start with the novice questions. These are pulled from Reddit. GameStrider09, could you explain Warhammer lore to someone who knows almost nothing about it? Warhammer 40K is a colossal sci-fi setting that's been around for about 35 years at this point. It's set in the far future, 40,000 years in the future, at a time when humanity has spread out across the galaxy and is constantly embattled against a horde of alien enemies, rebellious traitors, and demons from hell. It's extremely grimdark. In fact, that's where that term comes from, and it's also very, very silly. Particular links 2586. How powerful exactly is a Space Marine? Yeah, this is a question that no one ever really answers. Space Marines are like the poster faction of Warhammer 40k. They're the Imperium of Man, which is the human faction's special forces. And while they're the lead characters of all the video games, we never really get an accurate scale of how powerful they are. Warhammer exists in loads and loads of novels and comic books and video games, and they're about as powerful as they need to be for the plot to happen. The general rule is Space Marines are really, really dangerous. They've got thick ceramite armor, they're armed with horrifically devastating weapons, and they're genetically engineered. So they're full of extra spare organs, they're 8 foot tall, they're extremely fast and extremely strong, and all the general rules would say that they're the equal of 10 or 100 regular soldiers. Other than that, it's kind of vague. Naylor Burns, can someone explain what is going on here? Okay, so the guy in the door is what is called a servitor. Thing is, the Imperium of Man is so far in the future that they've gone through all the other things that happen in sci-fi fantasy settings. So they've had their massive war against the intelligent robots that happens in every setting. And that led them to kind of distrust machinery, especially intelligent machinery. Also, the Imperium of Man is a very horrible place that has a very low estimation of the value of human life. So, instead of using robots, they just grab a spare person, mind wipe them, fill them full of technology, and get them to, open the automatic door for the rest of their lives. And that is what a servitor is. This guy has been wired into an alcove as a human robot. His only job for the rest of his existence is to open and close the door when someone gives him the right code. Nizzy De Niro, similar question here. I'm completely new to Warhammer 40k. What the is this? Right, so we've said that the Imperium is kind of a horrible place to live. One of the ways it does that is by also being a massive overbearing state religion that executes anyone who disagrees as a heretic. The religion in question is sort of vaguely based on Renaissance Christianity. And if you look at all those old paintings and frescoes on Italian palaces, you'll see all these little cherubs, little babies with wings that symbolize how pure and innocent heaven is. Well, the Imperium wants that too, so it made some. This is a cyber cherub. It's a vat-grown baby that's then mind-wiped, filled full of cybernetics, has some wings grafted on it, and then sort of flaps around churches, making them extra holy. Also, there are models of these. You'll find them in the miniature range. They'll be doing odd jobs and tasks like holding up an Inquisitor's scroll or carrying a Space Marine's spare ammunition. They're all over the place. Mr. J, 0801, lore question, the bones in cases or hanging off their armor. You see this a lot in Space Marines. Yeah, what's up with that? Okay, so another part of this massive religion, taken from the real world, is the idea of reliquaries. Reliquaries are boxes which contains, in the real world, the finger bones of a saint or something. You can often see them in certain denominations' churches. In 40k, they're also everywhere. Space Marines might carry the skull of an honored brother in a box on their armor, or display an honored captain of the chapter, his remains, on a stick to inspire everyone around them and remind them about the God Emperor or about their mission. Also, they will take those skulls, put even more cybernetics in them, and then again, carry them around as little mates, doing odd jobs. Those are called servo skulls. You only get one if you were exceptionally holy in life. S10 Galaxy 2. So do lasguns shoot beams of light or bolts of energy? All right, lasguns are like the standard gun that regular humans use in 40k. They're laser guns. They're a bit too small and basic for Space Marines to use. Space Marines prefer weapons that like make people explode to scare their enemies. But lasguns are like the basic weapon of 40k. Everyone's got them. They're produced in vast numbers. And the ways in which they've been depicted have changed. The official answer now in any new media is that lasguns fire bolts of light a bit like a Star Wars blaster. But there's some older video games like Dawn of War from the early 2000s where they're shown firing like lines, beams of energy. The Warhammer 40k universe is really big. All their technology is made a million different ways on a million different planets. So while the official answer now I think is bolts of energy, in reality it could be anything. Okay, Zathandron, another equipment one. What actually powers power weapons? So power weapons means any form of energized assault weapon, like a sword or an axe, or sometimes in 40k, a great big punchy fist called a power fist. What actually powers them is never really said. Whenever anyone mentions it in the game, it's just called a power cell, and they kind of leave it there. In very, 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 very old lore from the early 90s, there's talk of these being like crystal matrices that can be filled with light energy, but no one's really mentioned any more than that in about 30 years. So who knows? Some sort of electrical power cell that powers them for a long time. You can see on the weapons usually they've got little lines and little beads where the electricity is meant to come from. You'll also notice that there's a lot of chain swords around, which are chainsaw swords. Those are powered by space petrol, Promethium. They've got a little exhaust on the side and they sort of rev up. So that's a lot simpler to answer. Okay, Sevson says, what is the meaning of Titus's right pauldron? Very specific. Titus is a part of the Ultramarines chapter. All the Space Marines in 40k are divided up into these chapters of about 1,000 Marines spread across the galaxy. They've all got their own heraldry, and all that heraldry varies a bit. But the answer to this is actually pretty simple. Titus has the rank of Lieutenant, and the skull with a little red blazon around it is the official armor mark for a Lieutenant. You can also tell his like white and red bands on the helmet also say that he's a Lieutenant. The scroll work underneath isn't part of that symbol. It just says his name. Shock Kitty. What are Tech Marines? Okay, you know how the Imperium had their artificial intelligence war thousands of years ago? They've kind of got over it. Well, one of the ways they kind of got over it was by making technology inaccessible to most people. In fact, technology is now considered such a dark art that it's kind of like ritualized magic. They believe that their machines have spirits and you have to pray to them, and sometimes they actually do. And the people who guard all this ancient knowledge about how technology works are called the Adeptus Mechanicus. They build a lot of the technology that the Imperium of Man uses, which means they build a lot of the technology that the Space Marines use. Space Marines are kind of independent though, so they don't want to keep going to the Adeptus Mechanicus to get anything fixed. Instead, they send Space Marines to Mars, which is where the Adeptus Mechanicus is based, and they receive decades of training in the mysteries of the machine. They come back from Mars as Tech Marines clad in red armor, and then they spend their time building weapons and fixing machinery and piloting vehicles for the chapter. Chasms VR. Why do the Thousand Suns burst into purple energy when you kill them? That's because the Thousand Suns don't have any bodies inside the armor. The Thousand Suns were one of the 20 Space Marine legions that initially went out and conquered the galaxy for the Emperor. Each of the Space Marine legions had a specialism. The Thousand Suns were all psychers. They were sorcerers or wizards. They were very, very good at it. But the thing is, in 40k, being a psyker means you have to use the power of the warp, and the warp might kill you, get you possessed by a demon, or turn you into a big mess of limbs and flesh called a chaos spawn. And that kept happening to the Thousand Suns. It wasn't very good for them. It was a bit embarrassing as legions go. They're one of the traitor legions. In the Horus Heresy, they turned against the Emperor. And when that had all played out, their first captain, a guy called Ajek Ahriman, tried to do this huge spell to fix the tendency to turn into a massive lump of quivering flesh. This spell went sort of wrong. It's the nature of 40k and demons that things sort of do exactly what you want in the way you really don't want. And everyone in the Legion who wasn't a very good sorcerer turned into a pile of dust, sealed inside their armor, bereft of a personality, and a lot like a sort of automaton, a robot controlled by the sorcerers. So you know, they weren't going to turn into Chaos Spawn anymore, but it wasn't the result that Ahriman wanted.
Traitors! You will burn!
And related to that, Beneficial Process says, is there a lore reason why the Heretics have such sick armor? Yeah, we're talking about the Thousand Suns again here. You'll notice that they look a specific way. That specific way is kind of space Egyptian, because the planet they came from, Prospero, was themed as kind of space Egypt. So there's a lot of ancient Egyptian styling and heraldry in the art direction. Prospero was famous for sphinxes and pyramids and scarabs, and they all wield these backwards curved khopesh swords that you might find in that era art. This is common all the way through 40k. All of these different Space Marine chapters or traitor legions all came from different planets. Those planets had different cultures, which are influenced by real world ones, and they all look different. For a lot of the loyal chapters, that's just a paint scheme, but all the traitor legions get like much fancier armor. A lot of them are full of like spikes and top knops and pointy bits and yeah, looking like a very rich ancient Egyptian. Marcus asks, Space Marine lore questions, Space Marines versus Primarus Marines, and why is it dishonorable to serve as a Black Shield? So Space Marines, as we said, poster boys of Warhammer, 8 foot tall, genetically engineered super soldiers full of extra organs. They were invented by the Emperor when he did his great crusade and conquered the galaxy, which is 10,000 years before 40k happens. And they're generally considered the most elite, superhuman, cool, fightiest troops in the galaxy. However, that wasn't enough. Just after the heresy, one of the Primarks, the commanders of the legions, Robute Guilliman, set an Adeptus Mechanicus Magus a task to make them even better. And this took 10,000 years, and when Guilliman woke up again, he was sleeping for a very long time, they were revealed. Primaris Marines are slightly bigger, slightly taller, and have 3 extra organs, and the genetic corruption that had sort of slowly happened to Space Marines over the 10,000 intervening years. Some of them had a tendency to turn into space werewolves or become space vampires. That corruption is slightly less unreliable in Primaris Marines.
I awaken.
Lieutenant Titus, Ultramarines, 2nd Company.
Basically, Primaris Marines, like this guy here, are an updated form of Space Marine. They're slightly bigger and they have a slightly bigger model range. Black Shields are a bit different. Titus in Space Marine 2 starts out in an organisation called the Deathwatch. That's like a organisation of loads of Space Marines from different chapters who have sort of gone on secondment. They work for the Deathwatch for a short period of time, a few decades, which is short if you're a Space Marine. And in that time, their job is to hunt down alien threats from the Xenos. And the idea is it's like a cultural exchange. While they do this, they're all going to learn each other's tactics, and then they'll be able to take all this knowledge and special technology back to their home chapters. However, the Deathwatch also has another function, which is to house Space Marines who maybe have nowhere to go. Space Marines who have been dishonored in some way. Maybe they've done something wrong and been kicked out of their chapter, or maybe their chapter got destroyed and they were one of the very few survivors, and they tend to feel really ashamed about that. They can just paint over their armor so no one knows where they're from and go and join the Deathwatch kind of forever. That's a way of them continuing to serve without the dishonor of wherever they came from. Most other Space Marines consider them a bit untrustworthy because of it. Solid Snake Scott says, all I know is that he's a rotting corpse on a throne. Why do they still fight for a dead emperor? The emperor of mankind is this real, but sort of mythical, but sort of real figure that joined humanity together 10,000 years before, created the Space Marines, created the Primarchs, sent them all out conquering the galaxy and founded the Imperium of Man. At the end of that, he was then betrayed and mortally wounded by his son Horus. That's how you ended up with all the traitor legions. And ended up sitting on a thing called a golden throne, which is a device that does 2 jobs. It sort of helps him focus and a navigational beacon called the Astronomicon, without which everyone would be very bad at navigating the galaxy. And it also holds closed a warp portal on Earth, on Terra, behind which is loads of demons. Whether he's actually a corpse, that's a bit of a question. He certainly hasn't moved, done much, or spoken to many people for the last 10,000 years. But the idea is that his psychic energy is still holding that gate closed, and his spirit floats around in the warp. He's a very powerful psyker, helping people out, which means that everyone sees it as a miracle from their god. So of course, they're not fighting for their dead emperor. They're fighting for their still semi-alive, very, very emaciated god.
We are the Emperor's angels.
Alright, that's all the novice questions. Those are the easy ones to answer. We'll make things a little bit trickier with the adept questions. This is just going to be me explaining things for way longer. Trickster RD, can the Emperor return? What do you mean return? He's right there on a giant golden throne on Earth. Can't miss him. Usually when people ask this, what they mean is he going to come back to life and start walking around and stuff? It's a difficult question. Generally, if he gets up off the throne, hordes of demons on Terra, everyone dies, and navigation's a bit messed up for a while. There are people in world who think that the Emperor might be reawakening a bit. His miracles have got a bit more common in the recent storyline. That's because in the recent storyline, a massive rift has opened across the galaxy and psychic energy's pouring out of it. And the Emperor, very powerful psyker, massive space wizard, maybe he's regenerating a bit because of that. That's what they think. There are also other people in world who think that if they kill the Emperor, he'll like reincarnate and come back as like a walking around very powerful guy again. But obviously doing that runs the risk of demons. So no one really wants to try it. Rafiki knows the way one. Have the Tyrannids ever successfully communicated with another species? Yes, sort of. They've definitely communicated hunger and hate into the minds of other species, but that's about it. The Tyrannids are an intergalactic bug swarm. They're ruled over by this thing called the Hive mind that only wants to consume all life and turn it into a Tyrannid. And when some characters have managed to like psychically touch against the Hive mind, they just get these waves of hate and anger directed at them. And that's about it. So yes, they're able to communicate, but they're not really able to have a chat.
Reclaiming lost worlds. Atoning for old shames. A crusade to cleanse the stars.
Effective client 9257. When would the Deathwatch actually be deployed versus regular Space Marines? Okay, slight weird thing here. Space Marines are ancient, even within the Imperium. They come from a time when the Emperor walked among mortals. And so a lot of the normal people in the Imperium consider them like angels. Very few people will ever see one unless you're in a very, very dangerous battlefield. The Space Marines aren't really deployed anywhere. No one can really tell them what to do. They've got an ancient obligation to keep the Imperium safe, and when bad things happen, they will go and attempt to keep an area safe. That means that when people want Space Marines to intervene, they have to like ask them nicely if they would like to come and fight on their behalf.
This planet is ours, witch.
Deathwatch tend to do that too. They're stationed across the galaxy in these watch fortresses, and they're meant to be keeping a lookout for Xenos activity in the area. But the Deathwatch also work with the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition, which is kind of like the Imperium's secret service. Inquisitors are kind of like secret agents within the Imperium. The Ordo Xenos are the bit of the Inquisition that deal with aliens, and they can like request that the Deathwatch come with them to investigate something or supply them with some troops to eliminate a threat. But it's still sort of a request. Space Marines aren't really people anyone in the Imperium wants to order around. Bing Bong 86. How do Space Marines, individually and collectively, carry around enough bolter ammo to stay in sustained fights? Yeah, good question. This is something that is not really shown accurately on the models, or to be fair, in any of the games. A bolter clip does not carry many bullets. Generally, the rule is that, in theory, if you're using Space Marines, they're not going to be in a sustained fight. The main military of the Imperium is the Astra Militarum, which is regular guys with lasguns, and Space Marines are called in to do like surgical strikes, take out enemy leaders, stuff like that. So the idea is they sort of go in, do their job, go out and move on to the next war zone. Of course, they do sometimes end up defending positions, and in that case, then they'll have their servitors and chapter servants ship down barrels of ammunition. But the main reason this is assumed not to be a problem in Warhammer is that a Space Marine without a bolter is still exceptionally dangerous. They're clad in ceramite armor, they weigh tons, they're extremely fast moving, and swords don't run out of ammo.
With pride, I wear the symbol of my chapter and join my brothers in war.
Okay, we've done the novice questions and the adept questions. The next set is the real difficult stuff. This is the expert questions. Psychological Nail 83. Do the Chaos Gods have actual physical bodies or like a permanent one that could potentially die. So we've mentioned the warp. The warp is an alternate dimension that the Imperium use for space travel. Actually, it's full of emotional energy generated by all the normal mortal beings in real space. And that emotional energy sort of congeals together in the warp. The warp has no space or time or distance. It's a weird place. And becomes sentient. And the main expression of that are the 4 chaos powers, which are these massive, slow intelligences of warp energy that people in the real world sometimes find out about, worship, gain superpowers, and occasionally get turned into a gribbly mess chaos spawn thing. Worshipping chaos is generally not very good for you, and the people who do it are the biggest enemies of the Imperium. As we said, there are 4 big chaos gods: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. The Thousand Suns in the Space Marine game serve Tzeentch, but what they actually are is kind of up for debate. The warp is a realm with no physical dimensions. It doesn't obey Euclidean geometry. And so the entities that are the chaos gods or demons don't really have any physical form when they're in there. Imagine them like a giant angry cloud. However, sometimes mortals worshipping them get messages from them or interact with them. And when they interact with them, they picture them as these huge people in strange landscapes. Sometimes characters have gone into the warp and experienced that, but it's deliberately unclear whether the characters are actually in a physical place in the warp, which sounds like a contradiction, or whether they're having a dream, or whether they're there, but their mind can't really process what's going on. So it seems that a chaos god could kind of manifest and temporarily have a body, maybe long enough for someone to have a chat with it, which is something you probably won't come out of sane. But whether they have a body that really means anything, whether you could like stab it and the god would die, it doesn't really work like that. I think in order to kill a chaos god, you'd need to stop anger existing, which is quite difficult, especially in Warhammer 40K. Horror show disco. Why can't forces literally just go under or over the Great Rift? This is a question that comes out of the way the galaxy's depicted in Warhammer. Obviously, the galaxy's three-dimensional. This is a common thing for a lot of sci-fi franchises, right? But in Warhammer, they tend to show it as a great big flat map. And to be fair, a bit like Star Wars, all the spaceships act like they're atmospheric planes or naval battleships. So everyone ignores the 3D-ness a bit. The Great Rift is a massive warp rift that bisects the galaxy and cuts one half of the Imperium off from the other. In every map, it's shown as being a long, thin thing, like a barrier that spaceships can't get through. And I think the real actual canon answer to this question is that no one's thought of that. I would suggest that because humanity actually have to use the warp to get anywhere, traveling in real space would take way too long. And the Great Rift is a warp rift. It's where the real space and the warp overlap, that once you're in the warp, it becomes a bit more of a metaphysical barrier, one you can't just easily nip round the side of. Maybe people can still go around it if they go the long way round. It just might take millions of years. Phantom Dust 149, another warp one. Why are the Necrons supposedly immune to possession? We're now at the point of this video where we've already explained all the things you need to know about to answer this question, so that's good. Demons are entities that live in the warp. They're made of the warp. And if you talk to them too much, they might end up possessing you, like taking over your body, which is a horrific experience. They don't know which way limbs should bend, which is very painful for the people living in the body. That's called possession. But to do it, you need to have a little link to the warp. In 40K, that's what souls are. They're everyone's little tiny bit of a link to the warp. Some people with very powerful ones can do magic. That's what psykers are. However, the Necrons are this ancient race that long ago was sort of tricked by some star vampires into giving up their souls and becoming robots. Some of them, the really powerful ones, the really rich ones, managed to keep hold of a bit more personality. But all the regular ones just became mindless drones and technically don't have any connection to the warp anymore, which is why it would be very difficult for a demon of the warp to possess one. Rafiki Knows the Way again asks, if Tyrannids ate a Primark, would the hive mind have access to the Emperor's DNA and all that comes with it? Interesting question. Obviously, the Emperor's power is mostly his psychics. Questionable if that counts as being his DNA. And the Primarchs are like formed from the Emperor's genetic material. They're his generals and sort of sons, so they carry the Emperor's DNA. So yeah, if Tyranids ate a Primarch, they probably would have access to the Emperor's DNA. Thankfully, the Primarchs are all either dead or horrifically powerful in world, so that hasn't happened yet. Although, there was actually a plot line in one of the books where the Blood Angels, who are a very old chapter of Space Marines, have some relics that contain the blood of their Primarch from thousands of years ago, and when they were defending against the Tyrannid invasion, this suddenly became a major urgent plot point. They hadn't quite thought of the implications until the Tyrannids showed up. How much has the Emperor talked after getting on the Golden Throne? Depends how you mean. Physically, very, very little. We have a few records of extremely important people gaining access, either legally or illegally, to the Emperor's throne room and attempting to have a chat. That's usually not a pleasant experience. The Emperor's fractured across the galaxy trying to deal with way too much shit, so that's like a hurricane of voices yelling different things at you if you actually get to talk to him. Obviously, he's also their god, so no one really gets to do that. However, many people believe that they get messages from the Emperor in like dreams and visions, and there's this thing called the Imperial Tarot, which is a psychic card deck that various people in the Imperium use to try and predict the future, and they believe that the Emperor is sending them messages through it. So physically, not very much, extremely painful, don't do that. Psychically, maybe loads? Currency General 4419. Do loyalist Space Marines harvest gene seed from slain traitor Space Marines, and would traitors harvest it from loyalists? Obviously, this question is heresy. Right, in order to do all that recruitment with the kids and stuff, what Space Marines need is gene seed, which they grow inside themselves. So when a Space Marine dies, Space Marine apothecary, like a battlefield medic, scoops out his gene seed, turns it into more organs, and then they can make more Space Marines. The way Space Marines reproduce is by kind of harvesting gene seed and turning it into organs. Obviously, no self-respecting loyalist chapter of Space Marines would ever do something so heretical as harvesting gene seed from a traitor Space Marine. In fact, it's considered extremely heretical to do it from anyone outside your chapter line. But there are some records of people doing that. There are some Space Marine chapters who thousands of years ago were tasked with exploring and protecting some far away area of space and who don't get resupplied very often. Sometimes we've had stories of them just taking gene seed from wherever they can. They sort of justify it as saying, our holy duty to protect this area is more important. So that does happen a bit. It's considered very bad form when it does. Traitor Space Marines don't care though. Traitor Space Marines will take it anywhere they can get it. If you're a traitor Space Marine, then you've been outside supply lines for so long that they will take gene seed from any Space Marine they happen to find dead on a battlefield. Traitor Space Marines have been known to get gene seed from dead loyalists on a battlefield, take it away, make some new traitor Space Marines out of that gene seed, and then bully that traitor Space Marine because they came from a filthy loyalist source. And finally, a nice easy one from Cephandrius. I love lore videos. Where to start with Warhammer? Well, I'm glad you asked. My name is Arbitor Ian. I have a YouTube channel full of videos about the sometimes extremely confusing background of Warhammer 40K. You can find links to all of that in the description below. So, there we go. Hopefully that's cleared up some of the questions you might have had about Warhammer. Maybe it's just opened a load more ones up. Anyway, thanks for watching.